rather than full-time developers. Setting the appropriate rate is one of the most important ways to set the right tone for the relationship between yourself and your client. Your rate communicates a lot about who you are, how you work, and what your clients should expect. And one thing I'm realizing more and more as I become more experienced, I'm on year 7 of my career, is learning this equation from the other side. I'm now working with more and more junior devs, and I'm the one who's paying them, in addition to my own client work. But I've been on the other side of the negotiating table more frequently, where I'm asking a freelance contract engineer who I'm subbing out to, what's your hourly rate? How much should I expect to pay by the hour? So forth and so on. And it's important to understand, again, that this sets the tone of the relationship. Every level of rate, at least as I see it, conveys a set of expectations and a certain level of, I guess for lack of a better phrase, professionalism. For example, if a developer quotes to me that his hourly rate is 20, then I'm going to expect a certain level of professionalism or a lack of professionalism. Like they might not be very good at version control. They might not know how to do good commit messages. They won't check in their code every session, every day. They won't know proper invoicing. And I'm going to have to show them a lot of basic stuff, like how to manage some basic libraries and stuff like that. And when you quote a rate of $20 an hour, and these are USD rates on the coastal cities, so New York, San Francisco, places like that. If you're watching this from overseas, I don't know what the numbers are in your case, but around here, $20 an hour is an entry-level rate, so that carries with it a set of expectations on my end as the consumer of that rate. If we go up the ladder a bit, let's say it's $30 an hour, well, then I expect a little bit less of that. It's pretty common sense, I would suppose. I would expect a junior developer at $30 an hour to understand basic version control, know how to branch and merge, how to submit code to a working branch, understand the basics of invoicing, sending an invoice every 2 weeks, documenting your work, things of that sort. Maybe your code wouldn't be top shelf. I mean, at $30 an hour, I wouldn't expect that. But I would expect you to understand, basic jQuery, Bootstrap, CSS, things of that sort. Nothing too crazy. Mostly entry-level stuff that you learn in, Code Academy or Free Code Camp or whatever after the first few months. And then you just keep going up the ladder. So if I'm looking at, let's say, $60 an hour, $60 an hour, I expect a certain level of professionalism there. I shouldn't have to explain, I shouldn't have to show this person how to create an invoice. And I shouldn't be asking things like, or they shouldn't be asking me like, hey, how do I set up an invoicing system? I shouldn't have to explain version control. It should just be understood. I shouldn't have to cover the basics of client-side rendering versus server-side rendering, and when to use client-side requests versus populating data server-side, things like that. These are all things that I expect from a $60 an hour developer. And then you go up past 100, and then you're looking at senior level rates, or at least close to it. At that level, 100 plus per hour, I shouldn't have to explain anything. I should just have to explain what I want. So, I bill well north of 100, and when I get a new assignment now, which is roughly every 2 months or so, 1 or 2 months, the training is minimal. It's maybe like an hour of just here's the code base, here's what you need to know. It's typically about an hour. And then the rest is just, here you go. Just here's the list of stuff we need to get done. Just tell us how much time you need and we'll do it. And that's just been my life for a while. And that's what I communicate to my client in terms of expectations. My client expects that given my rate. And that's fair. That's totally understandable. I shouldn't have to have too much hand-holding. I rarely talk to the actual lead developers on my teams, my freelance teams, because they're busy, and that's what they pay me for. Like they shouldn't have to explain this, that, and the other. Because I'm charging a senior rate, and I'm a senior developer, and that's the proper expectation. Sometimes it gets a little awkward where, like, one of the lead engineers might be like, "Hey, are you sure everything's okay? Like, do you understand everything?" Because they probably just are so used to explaining stuff over and over again. And I'm just like, yeah, sure, it's fine, and it is fine, everything's fine. And then like a week will go by, and I'm just pushing up code and crushing the bugs out, and just hammering out the Jira tickets and whatever, and the senior dev's like, "Oh wow, well, I guess that everything is okay." And that's my job. That's what I'm expected to do, and I embrace that. That's fine by me. I am ready for all the gnarly, shitty, just terrible code, the technical debt. This is just what I do, and that's what my client reasonably expects me to do because of what I charge. And everything's fair. It's all fair, and as long as the billing is properly done, and I'm not chasing down invoices, which thank God that's no longer part of my life. I just keep doing it. This is just it now, and I can just do this as long as I want. Now, sort of going back to my original reason for this video, at the lower levels, these dynamics are not very well understood. And as a junior developer, ostensibly that's what you are watching this video. I doubt that there are any senior level engineers watching my stuff. You have to understand what your rate communicates about you. And what I've noticed amongst juniors is this is something that's not terribly well understood. The general notion is from a junior developer is just, how much can I get? How much can I get? Like, what do you think I can almost get away with? I'm not saying this is wrong. You should try and get as much as you can get. That's America. This is the system we live in. But you have to understand what you set communicates something about you. So I'll just give you a few concrete examples in the past 2 months. So one junior dev, this situation didn't materialize. We never actually moved forward. She quoted me $60 an hour. And by the way, I should also point out, whenever I ask a junior dev what your rate is, I never negotiate. So if somebody says to me 30 an hour or 60 an hour or 90 an hour, I never say that's too high. I either just say yes or no. And once I've said no in the past 2 months because she billed $150 an hour, or I'm sorry, it was a he. And he probably is worth $150 an hour, but I didn't need someone at that level, right? But this next example, she quoted 60 an hour, and I said, fine, sounds good to me, 60 an hour. Now, then I wrote back to her, at that level, here's what I reasonably expect. I don't want to have to train you on client-side stuff and versus server-side stuff, and how to use a templating engine, and when to render stuff server-side versus client-side. This is a very big thing for me. And how to integrate your code into a Node Express environment. This is a pure front-end contract that I'm still looking for, by the way. I'm still looking for help here. And she got kind of turned off by it, and she said, I think maybe this isn't for me then. Now, I'll never know how good she is or she isn't, but for the rate that she quoted, I laid out what I considered reasonable expectations at $60 an hour. Now at $30 an hour, this is another individual I worked with about 2 months ago. My expectations weren't met at that rate. For what I was getting, I would have been happy to pay about 20 an hour. So if he had just said 20 an hour, we'd still be working. But after about 2.5 weeks, I made the determination this isn't $30 an hour worth. Now what do I expect at 30 an hour? Again, this is USD rates on the coastal cities. Well, that communicates to me that you have some experience contracting. Maybe you're not on year 7, maybe you're still on year 1 or towards the end of year 1. You've done a few things here and there. You probably broke a few projects and you had a few things go well, and you're still kind of figuring things out. But I shouldn't have to explain things like, again, just the basics of billing. Whether or not, who do I write the checks to? Your LLC, or to you personally, or do you have a DBA? These are all things you should have already figured out at $30 an hour. And if you haven't figured these things out yet, that's not a bad thing. It just communicates to me you're still at a level that's not quite commensurate with the rate that you're charging. And you have to calibrate that. You have to resolve those discrepancies one way or the other. Either lower your rate or raise your level. Pick one. But there's a discrepancy right now. And I'm making that determination based on my experience. So I'm not wrong. I'm the one with almost a decade of experience. I've been in this game way too long. I'm getting kind of tired of it. But I know what's right and what's not in my industry. So I'm not just, my perspective is off. My expectations are the right ones. So, you know what, you have to understand when you're setting your rate what it says about you. Also consider who's benefiting here. So with the other individual, the cheaper one who was charging $30 an hour, there were gaps in his knowledge. Boot camp graduate. So, you know, I'm not just finding some guys who, you know, who are in high school and college and whatever. Like, no, I'm finding older people who graduated boot camp. Ostensibly, they have some what should be considered a professional skill set if you went to a full-time boot camp for 4 months. Now, I lost my train of thought, so I'm sorry. Anyway, oh yeah, there were some gaps in his knowledge. And so my point was, if you're the engineer in this situation, consider the mutual benefit here. All right, so you're getting your rate. You're getting $30 an hour, and I never disputed that. You bill me 10 hours, $300. I pay you $300. Never going to argue that. So that's the reciprocation of value, theoretically. But what else was he getting out of this situation? Well, there were basically, you know, 25%, 20% of like de facto training on my end, where I would have to show him all these things, which would take a while, like how to use a proper templating engine, how to set up your Node Express properly, how to use the templating on the front end versus the client side, and how to loop through things like that. Entry level stuff. Okay, so did I want to do this? No, of course not. Am I willing to do that at 30 an hour? Not really. Am I willing to do that at 20? Yes, because that's my expectation at 20. At $20 an hour, I expect to have to do that. So it wouldn't surprise me. It just doesn't surprise me. I would kind of know that going in. I would be the fool to not really understand that's going to happen at a $20 an hour person. That's like a college kid, basically. So understand what your rate says about you. And then ask yourself, can you meet that expectation? If the answer is no, adjust your rate or raise your level. Pick one. Because at some point, it's something's going to give. Something has to give. So, you know, this other individual, well, the same one I was talking about before, you know, if he had lowered his rate, which I didn't ask him to do. I never ask anyone to lower their rate. But if he had proposed it, I'd still be working with him. Probably. Can't guarantee that, but I probably would. I would eventually have trained him up. And then I'd be subbing him out to any of my 3 clients right now, all of whom pay me over $150 per hour, one of whom pays me close to $400 an hour. All those opportunities are gone now for him. He'll never have those opportunities at least from me. He might find them somewhere else, but he'll never have them from me. All you have to do is say, look, maybe I wasn't quite ready for this level, but I want to continue learning. So let me just dial down my rate a little bit, and if you're willing, I'd like to stay on, and show me all the stuff that you consider necessary requisite knowledge. Now, again, I can't guarantee I would have gone with that because I got a lot of stuff I'm trying to get through. Like, I hire people not to train them because I need shit done. But for the right person, it's a good deal. So let's see here. I'm just checking my notes, making sure I didn't miss anything. So, that covers my key points. Make sure you understand what your rate says about you, and how it sets your expectation, how it sets your client's expectations. And then ask yourself, can you meet that? If somebody is billing me $50 an hour, $50 USD per hour, and I have to literally show that person how to generate invoices, that means he hasn't been doing much of this, and something's off there. It doesn't fit. There's a miscalibration there. It's not congruent with the rate. Something's off. And then it plants a seed in my mind saying, what am I doing with this guy? Like, is this really the right person for the job? Like, did I make a mistake here? And luckily, given how much development experience I have, I can make those assessments in like 2 weeks, not even, maybe a week or two. And I can correct my mistakes quickly. I cut my losses quickly, and then I just move on to the next thing. So I think with beginners or juniors, the hard part is the lack of perspective, and kind of knowing what your client should expect at various levels. And then always ask yourself, what are you getting out of it? Maybe you're benefiting more than you realize. If if somebody like Elon Musk wants to contract you for like a short job, I think most people would just do that for free. I think there's plenty of benefits there beyond just the hourly rate. I would hope so. Now, I'm not comparing myself to Elon Musk. I know that. I'm nowhere near. I'm just not even close to that level. But I'm doing okay as a contract engineer. I haven't lacked for work in a long time, many years, and from that standpoint, life's pretty good. And if your goal is to be a self-sufficient contract engineer, I've been doing that for a while. That's no longer a challenge in my life. It's gotten downright boring. So. Anyway, I don't want to get too off track about that. So the important thing is setting your rate is more than just a matter of how much can you get. Do not think of it that way. That is sort of a loser approach to the whole game. All right, setting your rate is your first real communication with your client. It's your first bona fide communication. When you throw out a rate, your client's always going to ask, what's your rate? He's not going to set it for you unless it's just in the job post already. But it kind of, after a certain level, that's not how it happens. You have an initial phone call, and then the prospective client at some point will say, how do you bill? What's your rate? That question is going to come up, and it should come up early. If it doesn't come up early, that's a bad sign. It should come up early. And at that point, you're communicating a level of professionalism that your client should expect. And it's not all about money. Like if I'm looking for someone to help me with one of my other projects that I'm working on, a pretty seriously intense, web stack, all the usual whatever, and he quotes me 20 an hour, I would probably say, this might be a little bit too much for you. Like at that rate, you're definitely too beginner for this. I need someone a little bit higher up. You're communicating to me you might not be ready for this. And that I would be looking for someone at the 60, 80, even $100 an hour zone. And I would be happy to pay it if that person delivers what I expect at $100 an hour. Then that's money well spent. So